Ever since Marvel shocked the world by announcing Robert Downey Jr. as Doctor Doom, one question has been impossible to ignore. Why? Not why bring Robert Downey Jr. back. Why bring him back as Victor Von Doom? Marvel could have hired almost any actor in Hollywood. Doctor Doom is one of the greatest comic book villains ever created, and there are countless actors who could have played him. Yet Kevin Feige chose the face of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. That decision doesn't feel random. It feels intentional. Since the announcement, fans have come up with dozens of theories. Some believe Doom is simply another Tony Stark from a different universe. Others think Marvel is relying purely on nostalgia after moving away from Kang. But today, I want to look at a theory that I think explains almost everything. It explains why Doctor Doom looks exactly like Tony Stark. It explains why Marvel insisted Robert Downey Jr. was the only person who could play this version of Doom. And if this theory is true, Marvel may have started setting it up years ago during Avengers Endgame. The craziest part? It all starts with one tiny conversation that almost everyone forgot. Welcome back to Unfold with You. Let's unfold this together. To understand this theory, we have to go back to Avengers Endgame. After Loki escapes with the Tesseract during the time heist, Tony Stark and Steve Rogers suddenly have a major problem. Without the Tesseract, and without enough Pym particles, their mission is over. So Tony comes up with another plan. Instead of returning to the present, they travel even further into the past. Their destination? Tony knows that both the Tesseract and Hank Pym's research were located at a military installation during that time, giving them one final opportunity to complete the mission. Once they arrive, Steve heads off to steal the Pym particles while Tony sneaks into the facility to retrieve the Tesseract. Everything goes according to plan, at least, until Tony unexpectedly runs into someone he never thought he'd see again, his father, Howard Stark. What follows is one of the most emotional conversations in the entire Infinity Saga. Howard has absolutely no idea he's speaking to his own son. Meanwhile, Tony gets something he never had in his own lifetime, a chance to talk to his father without anger, resentment, or regret standing between them. It's a beautiful scene. But buried inside that conversation is a detail that has fueled one of the biggest Marvel theories on the internet. As they're riding the elevator together, Howard casually mentions something. Maria is pregnant. He jokes about spending too much time at work and wanting to get home because his wife is expecting. At first, it sounds completely normal. In fact, if you're watching the movie for the first time, you probably don't think anything of it. But watch Tony. Instead of smiling, instead of making a joke, instead of getting emotional, he freezes, just for a second. Then he asks Howard one very specific question. How far along is she? It's such an oddly specific question that it's easy to overlook. Tony isn't asking whether they're having a boy or a girl. He isn't asking if Howard is excited. He's asking exactly how far into the pregnancy Maria is. Why? The simplest explanation is that Tony suddenly realizes his mother is pregnant with him, and he's trying to process the moment. Honestly, that could be all it is. But there's another possibility, and if you've watched enough Marvel movies, you know they rarely include dialogue without a reason. Tony Stark isn't just intelligent. He's one of the smartest people in the MCU. He's constantly calculating, constantly observing, constantly solving problems before anyone else even realizes one exists. So when someone like Tony suddenly looks confused by something as simple as his own mother's pregnancy, it immediately raises a question. Did something about the timeline stop making sense? At first glance, the answer appears to be no. According to Marvel's official timeline, Tony Stark was born on May 29, 1970. The Avengers supposedly traveled back to April 7, 1970. If those dates are correct, Maria Stark being pregnant lines up perfectly. Theory over. Except, There's one tiny detail that keeps this conversation alive: the way the date is displayed, and depending on how you interpret it, Marvel may not have traveled to April at all. Instead, they may have landed on one of the most important dates possible, July 4th, 1970. And if that's true, everything changes. Before we go any further, I want to make something clear. This next part is probably the biggest leap in the entire theory. There's no official confirmation from Marvel that this is what happened. But if it did happen, it suddenly explains a lot of strange details. Here's why. When Tony and Steve travel back in time, the quantum tunnel displays the destination as April 7th, 1970. Most of us instantly read that as April 7th, 1970. That's normal if you live in the United States. But outside the US, dates are usually written day, month, year instead of month, day, year. So what if Tony's time machine wasn't using the American format? After all, this wasn't designed to be a calendar on someone's phone. It was a machine built by one of the smartest people in the universe. A chronological format would actually make more sense, if that's the case. Then April 7th, 1970 doesn't mean April 7th. It means July 4th, 1970. Now, before you dismiss that as a coincidence, let's look at what actually happens once Tony arrives. Howard Stark isn't just working late. He's carrying flowers. He's apologizing for spending too much time at the office. And he also has something else with him, a can of sauerkraut. At first glance, who cares? It's just sauerkraut. Except, why would Marvel specifically choose that? Think about one of the most iconic foods associated with the 4th of July, hot dogs. And one of the most common toppings, sauerkraut. Individually, none of these details prove anything, but together, flowers. An apology for working on a holiday. Sauerkraut. A military base. It starts to paint a very specific picture. Maybe Howard wasn't just working another ordinary day. Maybe he was working during an Independence Day event. And there's actually another interesting detail that supports this. Years after Endgame released, concept material from an earlier version of the movie revealed a deleted scene. In that version, Tony sees a framed staff photo taken at the military base. The photo includes both Howard Stark and Hank Pym. Most importantly, it includes the exact date. The purpose of the scene was to explain how Tony knew the Tesseract and Hank Pym would both be there at the same time. The scene never made the final movie, but the idea behind it is important. Tony wasn't randomly choosing a year, he knew exactly when to go. Which raises another question. Why that day? If there really was some kind of military gathering, or a 4th of July celebration, it would explain why Howard and Hank Pym were both present. It would explain why Howard was carrying flowers. It would explain why he had sauerkraut. And suddenly, it also explains Tony's reaction, because if this really is July 4th, Tony shouldn't still be in his mother's womb. He should already be alive, not by years, not even by months, but by several weeks. Instead of meeting a father who's waiting for his son to be born, Tony should be meeting a father whose newborn son is already at home. That's a huge difference. And that's why Tony's expression suddenly becomes much more interesting. Instead of simply thinking, wow, my mom was pregnant with me, he could actually be thinking, wait a second, that can't be right. Now, does that prove Marvel secretly changed Tony Stark's birthday? No, absolutely not. But it opens the door to another possibility. Maybe Maria Stark wasn't pregnant with Tony at all. And this is where the comics completely change the conversation. One of the biggest revelations in Iron Man history isn't about armor, or the arc reactor, or even Stark Industries. It's about Tony himself. Because in Marvel Comics, Tony Stark wasn't born into the Stark family, he was adopted. For decades, fans believed Howard and Maria Stark were Tony's biological parents. Then Marvel pulled the rug out from under everyone. Tony discovers he was adopted shortly after birth. Meanwhile, Howard and Maria's biological child was someone else entirely, a boy named Arno Stark. If you've never heard of Arno, you're not alone. He's nowhere near as famous as Tony, but his existence changes everything. In the comics, Arno suffers from severe health complications at birth. Howard hides him away in order to protect him, while Tony grows up believing he's the Starks' only child. Marvel has changed pieces of this storyline over the years, but one fact has remained incredibly important. Tony Stark's origin wasn't what anyone thought it was. And that's exactly why this theory feels so interesting. Because Marvel Studios doesn't have to copy the comics. They just have to borrow the idea. Imagine Maria really is pregnant in 1970. But she's not carrying Tony. She's carrying Arno. Something tragic happens. Maybe Arno dies. Maybe he survives with serious complications. Maybe Howard hides him away. Whatever version Marvel chooses. Howard and Maria are left without the son they expected. So Howard makes a decision, one that changes the entire Marvel universe. He adopts. If this theory sounds impossible, that's because it probably should. After all, if Tony Stark was secretly born in Latveria, wouldn't someone have figured that out decades ago? Maybe. But maybe Marvel has already given us an answer. The strange thing about the MCU is that Latveria has never officially existed. Not once during the Infinity Saga do we hear its name. Instead, Marvel spends years introducing another fictional European nation, Sokovia. At first, Sokovia seems like nothing more than the setting for Avengers, Age of Ultron. It's the birthplace of Wanda and Pietro Maximoff, and eventually becomes the site of one of the Avengers' biggest failures. But after Age of Ultron, Sokovia slowly disappears. The country collapses. Its people scatter. Its land is left in ruins. So why spend years building up an entire nation, only to erase it? Some fans believe Marvel was making room for something else. Not another random country, Latveria. In the comics, Latveria sits in Eastern Europe, surrounded by political instability and conflict. It's isolated, technologically advanced in some ways, and ruled with absolute authority by Victor Von Doom. Sound familiar? A war-torn Eastern European nation with a complicated history already fits surprisingly well with what we've seen from Sokovia. Marvel wouldn't even have to invent an entirely new geopolitical history. They could simply reveal that what remains of Sokovia eventually becomes Latveria. And if Victor Von Doom originally came from that region, the pieces begin falling into place. Now think about Howard Stark. Howard wasn't just an inventor. He worked closely with governments. He had military connections. He operated around the world. Would someone like Howard have access to classified operations involving children, refugees, or secret research? Probably. If there were a child with extraordinary potential, Howard Stark is exactly the kind of person who could quietly bring that child back to America. And Howard has done morally questionable things before. Not because he was evil, because he believed the ends justified the means. That's a trait Tony inherited. And it's also a trait Victor Von Doom is famous for. All three men believe they're smart enough to solve impossible problems. The difference is where they draw the line. One of the most overlooked lines in the entire MCU comes from Iron Man 2. Tony watches a recorded message from Howard. For most of his life, Tony believed his father cared more about his work than about him. Then Howard says something unexpected. "My greatest creation is you." It's one of the most emotional moments in Tony's journey. On the surface, it's simply a father expressing love for his son. But listen to the wording. Howard doesn't say, "My greatest achievement was raising you." He doesn't say, "My greatest gift was being your father." He says, "My greatest creation is you." Creation. That's an unusual word, especially coming from a man who spent his life inventing technology. Now let's be clear, this doesn't mean Howard literally built Tony. But Marvel has a habit of hiding double meanings in dialogue. What if Howard wasn't speaking metaphorically? What if he truly believed he had created the man Tony became, whether through adoption, training, genetics, or something even more ambitious? Howard spent decades trying to shape the future. Captain America, SHIELD, the Super Soldier Program, advanced technology, the arc reactor, everything he touched was designed to push humanity forward. Who's to say Tony wasn't part of that vision? Here's where the theory becomes even more fascinating. Howard could shape Tony's environment. He could teach him, challenge him, inspire him, but he couldn't control one thing: choice. Every major turning point in Tony Stark's life comes down to a decision: building the first Iron Man suit, destroying his weapons business, creating Ultron, signing the Sokovia Accords, sacrificing himself in Endgame. Each time, Tony chooses. Victor Von Doom works exactly the same way. He's one of the smartest humans in Marvel history. He wants to save the world. He believes humanity needs order. The difference is that Doom is willing to remove freedom if it means achieving peace. Tony never crosses that line. Doom crosses it every single time. Which raises an uncomfortable possibility. What if Tony and Doom aren't opposites? What if they're the same person, separated by one decision? Marvel has explored this exact concept before. The multiverse isn't just filled with different people. It's filled with different choices. A universe where Peggy Carter becomes Captain Carter. A universe where Doctor Strange loses Christine instead of his hands. A universe where Ultron wins. Every reality begins with one moment that changes everything. So imagine a universe where Tony Stark experiences one tragedy differently. Maybe he loses Pepper. Maybe the Battle of New York breaks him. Maybe Thanos wins permanently. Maybe the snap costs him Morgan. Whatever the catalyst is, Tony reaches the same conclusion Victor Von Doom always does. The world cannot be trusted to save itself. Someone has to take control. Someone smart enough, strong enough, willing enough. And that's the day Iron Man dies. Not physically, philosophically. The armor stays. The genius remains. The determination grows even stronger. But the man inside changes. He's no longer trying to protect the future. He's trying to control it. And that's exactly how Victor Von Doom thinks. Up until now, everything we've discussed has been based on clues, comic inspiration, and educated guesses. But there's one question we still haven't answered. If this theory is true, why would Marvel cast Robert Downey Jr. at all? Why not simply introduce Victor Von Doom as a completely new character? Because the face matters, not just to us, to the characters inside the MCU. Imagine this. The Avengers are preparing for another multiversal war. A new threat begins conquering entire realities. Worlds disappear. Incursions start happening faster than anyone can stop them. Then the heroes finally come face to face with the man responsible. And standing before them is Tony Stark. Not someone who resembles him, not a distant relative. Tony. Steve Rogers isn't there anymore. Natasha is gone. But Peter Parker remembers. Pepper remembers. Rhodey remembers. Morgan remembers. Everyone who loved Tony suddenly has to look into the eyes of the man who once saved the universe. Except, those eyes belong to Dr. Doom. That creates a conflict no other casting choice could. If Marvel hired another actor, the Avengers would simply see a new villain. By casting Robert Downey Jr., every scene immediately becomes personal. The audience understands the emotional weight. The characters do too. They're forced to ask impossible questions. Is this really Tony? Can he be saved? Or is the man they loved truly gone? That's infinitely more compelling than introducing a villain they've never met. Since Loki, Marvel has repeatedly shown us that variants don't always look different. Sometimes they do. Sometimes they don't. We've seen multiple Lokis with different appearances. We've also seen variants who look almost identical. The multiverse isn't governed by one simple rule. It's chaotic, infinite, unpredictable. That means another universe can absolutely contain someone who looks exactly like Tony Stark, without actually being Tony Stark. Or Marvel could go even further. Maybe this Doom is Tony, just not the Tony we knew. A version whose life slowly pushed him toward dictatorship instead of heroism. One decision, one tragedy, one impossible choice. That's all it takes to create an entirely different person. And honestly, that idea fits one of Marvel's oldest themes. Heroes and villains are often separated by circumstances more than ability. Tony Stark and Victor Von Doom are both brilliant, both charismatic, both obsessed with solving impossible problems. Both believe they know what's best for humanity. The only difference is where they're willing to stop. If you've read Marvel's Secret Wars, you already know why Doom is the perfect villain for this saga. He's not trying to destroy existence. He's trying to save what remains of it. After countless universes collide, Doom takes the surviving fragments and builds a single world under his rule. To him, it's mercy. To everyone else, it's tyranny. Now imagine that philosophy coming from someone who looks exactly like Tony Stark, the man who sacrificed himself to save trillions of lives, the man who once told Steve Rogers that if they couldn't protect the Earth, they'd avenge it. Now standing before the heroes saying, the only way to save reality is to let me rule it. It's terrifying because it almost sounds reasonable. That's what makes Doctor Doom so dangerous. He's rarely motivated by chaos. He's motivated by certainty. He genuinely believes he's right. And that's exactly what made Tony Stark such an incredible hero. The conviction, the confidence, the willingness to make impossible decisions, swap out hope for control, and Iron Man becomes Doom. So, did Marvel really plan this all the way back in Endgame? Honestly, probably not every single detail. The MCU evolves constantly. Plans change, characters change, entire storylines change. But Marvel has always been incredibly good at taking old moments and giving them new meaning. A single line, a forgotten scene, a background detail. Years later, those moments suddenly become much more important. Whether the pregnancy scene was intentional or not, whether the July 4th clue was deliberate, whether Tony was ever meant to be connected to Victor Von Doom. One thing is undeniable. Marvel chose Robert Downey Jr. for a reason, not because he's famous, not because fans love him, but because no other actor brings decades of emotional history into the role before saying a single word. The second Doom removes his mask, every hero and every fan will feel something. Not fear, not excitement, loss, confusion, hope, maybe even denial. And if Marvel uses that emotional baggage to tell the story of Doctor Doom, we could be looking at one of the most fascinating villains the MCU has ever created. Maybe this theory ends up being completely wrong. Maybe Doom has absolutely no connection to Tony Stark. But until Marvel reveals the truth, these clues are hard to ignore. And if nothing else, they remind us why Marvel theories are so much fun in the first place. Because sometimes, the smallest details lead to the biggest questions. But what do you think? Did Marvel secretly plant these clues years ago? Or are fans connecting dots that were never meant to be connected? And if Robert Downey Jr.'s Doctor Doom isn't a Tony Stark variant, who do you think he really is? Let me know your theory down in the comments. If you enjoyed this deep dive, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to Unfold With You for more Marvel breakdowns, hidden details, and theories that go beyond the surface. Until next time, let's unfold the story together.